What's good, everyone? Welcome to the Outside the Box podcast. My name's Nick Engvall. This episode is an amazing conversation. It's something that I'm really passionate about. It's something that I think everyone can take something away from. If you're new to the podcast, this is a podcast about sneakers, but it's about the things that surround sneakers. It's about the conversations that need to be had in the world of footwear, in the industry of footwear, the design aspect, the creator aspect, just all of the surrounding things that kind of go along with the sneaker world. And on this episode, I talked to Jeremy Green. He's the founder of Calling All Creators, a name you might have heard of. They did some work with Adidas a few years back, and they kind of had a little bit of a shining moment, I would say. Just aligned perfectly with what Adidas was doing with the Brooklyn Creator Farm and kind of just that shift in mentality for a big corporate, giant, so to speak, going towards a more nimble and creative approach. At least that's the intention. So that said, let's just get right into the conversation. I hope you enjoy this one. I really did. And if you enjoy the conversation, definitely leave me a review on the Apple Podcasts app. Hit me up on Twitter, Outside Pods, Instagram, Outside Pods. Really trying to kind of feel out what else I can provide as far as content and entertainment value and maybe just things that make you also think outside the box. What's good, everyone? Welcome back to the Outside the Box podcast. My name's Nick Engvall. Today, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a couple of weeks, and I've got Jeremy Green, founder of Calling All Creators, to talk some design stuff and really some truly outside the box thinking when it comes to what we think of as footwear design. So welcome to the show, Jeremy. How you doing, man?
Not too bad, man. Welcome, peaceful world. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you, man. I think like our last conversation was definitely in my head much longer than we were on the phone. And it really got me thinking about the way that the whole design world of footwear and beyond, right? And I think I might have mentioned like this is close to me because my brother just finished industrial design, went through art and got his master or bachelor of arts and then decided to go back and get his design degree. And, just thinking about him finishing that amongst COVID and the challenges of like even networking as a new graduate, right, is so different than what traditionally happens, which I think is, I don't want to like get too deep into that yet, but kind of flawed anyway, right? Like, which I think you have some great ideas to where we could take this. But I guess before we get into that, what kind of got you into sneakers originally?
Great question. I guess more on the professional side, it's within the last, I'd say about 5 or 6 years, but, more on the personal side, something that, is culture, something that we grew up in, played basketball literally all my life. But, more back to the professional side, started Calling Our Creators back in 2016. And that was sort of my professional introduction to the footwear industry. But, as I mentioned, being into it from a culture standpoint, from a personal standpoint, both the aesthetic, the design, the culture has always been something that's been like what I wanted to do professionally. Just, unfortunately being Black, the industry being what it is, I didn't really realize that there was more opportunities beyond just a footwear designer up until, really about the last few years or so. They kind of keep those things from you in traditional education, lanes or avenues, being like universities and things like this, where it's industrial design, it's graphic design, it's marketing maybe, but even that's broad, and you don't necessarily know that you can have like a full rewarding career in sports and in footwear. So it's been a long time coming, but more professionally the last few years or so.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, man. I mean, I'm a little over 40 now. I've been working in the sneaker world for almost 15 years in some full-time aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I still think that my parents don't really know why I have all these sneakers or what I do. Like they see me doing content and they see some stuff, and occasionally I'll share an event that I was a part of that helped put together, or maybe share a shoe that I got to work on the marketing side for.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those things, I think, as I mentioned to you in a previous conversation, I really want to use this to kind of like showcase some of those things and really focus my energy on the content that I create on like just opening those doors for people, right? Like I think
Yeah.
there's so much more, right? Like we I mean, I'm, you know, I can relate in that, like, there's the three or four things that you think you've heard of coming out of school or just in general, right?
Mhm.
And then it's like, wait, Nike has, you know, 50, 100,000 employees, you know, like there's tons of people that aren't doing any of those things. So, it's good to hear that. Cause I think like it kind of, you know, reinforces my belief of like really needing to do these episodes of the podcast and have these
Yeah.
conversations and kind of, you know, shed some light onto things that are out there that I just think that I don't know. Sometimes it feels intentional and sometimes it doesn't, but I don't want to get into conspiracy
Right.
theories too deeply.
Well, I
But
think it's
it really is
also,
like, yeah,
I think it's also the fact that the industry itself has evolved, right? Like
yeah,
it's, back in, let's say 94, I would say it would probably be when I was old enough to really like appreciate and like recognize like sneakers. I mean, at the time I was what, 6. And I can't remember when exactly, but it was around that time when I got like my first pair of Jordan 6s. And like, I just loved the design of it. Like, I didn't really
yeah,
know or understand like who Michael Jordan was at the time. Like, I knew basketball, but like names and like figures, I guess, weren't like really a thing. But like when you just consider that and like just the early stages of the Jordan brand and how that evolved and like being able to see it and live it real time, you obviously see the front facing, the influencer, the creator, the athlete, or whoever this person is, but you very rarely see the back end of that. And that's, really the mission of calling on creators is really sort of expose and just make that part of the business more transparent. That hey, there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than you may think. And as I said, I believe that the industry has evolved and like a lot more of those opportunities have sprung up. And it's just been the case of, just you know what you know, or if kind of like energy, or like, if you've been in those spaces, if you're from Portland, if you're in the sports world, if you're in industrial design, like you knew of those things. And then now, really as of recently, like the last couple decades, are people starting to like figure out like, hey, I can go to school for this to be a footwear designer and work for this brand, or be apparel or materials or some sort of textile, and that be your specialty in your job and your function, but you're still doing, work and projects that you want to do. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, definitely. So calling all creators, you said started in 2016. What, you know, I guess walk me through how that all happened and how, you know, where you went from there to get us up to date in the last 5 years of doing this.
Yeah, yeah. So the moment that I started calling our creators was one of those late night, early morning, like creator moments, that I feel like a lot of people can relate to. That 3 a.m. just like spark of inspiration. But looking back at it, I do feel that a lot of moments and like, just experience led up to that particular moment. So at the time, I mean, this was 2016. I was actually working for Tesla at the time. So just to back up even further, I originally went to school for architecture. That shifted to sustainability was my actual degree, but I focused on civil engineering or urban dynamics and business. So worked for Tesla immediately out of college. That was a super rewarding opportunity. Just learned really how to build and like scale a business, because I didn't work for the automotive side. I actually worked for the renewable energy side. So just
Nice.
working on really building, testing, validating, scaling new services, new products. And it started with just renewable energy, selling solar panels, and then what it is today, which is Tesla Energy, with like branded products that like Tesla is known to have. But really was building that infrastructure. And while I loved the company and the work and like the opportunity and I mean, certainly like the pay and the equity at that time, I was like, well, two things. One, for anyone that understands like renewable energies and sustainability and all that, and specifically power, understands that it's one of the last few industries that companies can still have a monopoly on. So in that, it made my job like very, very, very difficult. So in that, like just the industry in and of itself, like just needed more time to develop. But also the second part of that was I just wanted to be in sneakers. So started calling all creators randomly and instantly. And I mean, literally, like the next morning, like I woke up to a DM from Mark Dolce, and he's like, "Who is this? Who's running this account?" So by extension of that, was introduced to him. He thought it was someone internal, so it was a bit shocking for him to see that someone was like, building energy outside of the brand, because at the time it was just their recruiting initiative. It was calling all creators. At the time, Mark had just joined. They were still building out like really the idea of what the Brooklyn Farm was. They had the space, but they were really building out like what the brand of it was. So, by extension of that, we sort of been or became the mood board, but also like the digital social media arm of the Brooklyn Farm and just advanced concepts. So super rewarding. I think that's a unique experience. Like that's not something that happens every day for sure. To be like instantly connected to like one of your childhood heroes of like, in the footwear like design realm. So that was cool. But like I said, it was a long time coming, just building up to like, footwear and specifically design and like that arm of the business is where I want to be. And like that was the moment in which for me it was validated because someone like a Mark Dolce like instantly recognized it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's such an awesome thing. I'm a huge believer in synchronicity and
Yeah.
that, there's no such thing as a coincidence. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that, that's just such a beautiful thing to hear, literally just putting your thoughts out there, right? Like,
Yeah.
and somebody recognizing it, if you're not familiar with Mark Dolce, he's a former Nike designer that designed countless things that you already know,
Yeah.
but then moved to Adidas to start the Brooklyn Creator Farm, which is kind of the hub of ideas for Adidas at this point, I think. But I think the other thing that's really awesome about this, as you were talking about working with Tesla, and one of the things that I really hope to kind of continue to push out through the podcast and my content is the conversation around sustainability, right? Like
Yeah.
sustainability, it's a buzzword. And on the last episode of this podcast, I talked to Liz Beecroft, who is a social worker, but her goals are to get people to talk about mental health and change that narrative to be thinking of mental fitness, right? The same way we work out our
Mm-hmm.
bodies, we need to work out our minds. And I think that that's something that there's something there that's got to be shifted in the sustainability conversation, because
100%.
I yeah I think I might have told you this in our last conversation, but I'm going to reiterate it. I remember when I first started writing about sneakers, 13, 14 years ago, whatever. One of the first shoes that Nike that I got a press release from Nike from was a all black Air Max 90 that was, quote, a
Mm-hmm.
vegan friendly shoe, right? And I just looked at the shoe and thought, like, well, this is just an all plastic shoe. Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
use any animal byproducts, but it's all man made, not to pick on the materials, but garbage, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
like, how do we change that, right? Because just because you can say something is vegan or sustainable in some way doesn't mean that it actually is, right? Like, just because you use
Right.
a piece of sustainable material as a part of a bigger thing doesn't mean that shoe could be recycled down and brought back to life in another form again, right? Like, especially
Exactly.
considering like some of the stuff like glues and that. But how do you kind of see that whole conversation around sustainability, maybe as it is, and where we could go with it that might help kind of, because it sounds like it's awesome to hear, like, you basically, I was so, kind of floored by this when we talked, but like you almost
Mm-hmm.
combine your two passions, right? It's like
Yeah.
sustainability on one side, footwear on the other. And it's just inspiring to see people doing this. So like, I'm juiced to just talk to you about it and like learn from you about it, but like also hopefully get other people excited about, like, look, we all have these things. So let's hear about what you think about how we could change the sustainability conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, not to be like meta and like, we've talked about like divinity and just, the universe and timing, but I feel like, and that was even me prefacing like, building up to the moment that was calling all creators is I feel like the moment's now when it comes to sustainability. And the unfortunate side is, the experience that you shared. And I know in our last discussion, we kind of joked that like, I liken that to soy, right? As it relates to food, and because there's always this strong parallel of sustainability in our food systems. That while soy is very, very cheap to produce, you can manufacture benefits, health benefits for the human body. It it's plastic, like it's fake. It doesn't do wonders for the cycle that is biology. And yes, it's the easiest way to produce the most amount of product, as it relates to the food system. So I liken that or parallel that to, the all black Air Maxes, which is like, okay, cool. You just replaced the material, same shoe, and you created a narrative around it. But while that's been the case, I've operated in, although my degree is sustainability, I graduated from the School of Sustainability. I kind of hate the word sustainability because it's been co-opted by a lot of corporations of, this narrative of like, all right, we're green, right? And this is our sustainability initiative. And while that's great, it's literally one quarter of the pie, I would say. And I've replaced that internally and just with my own, lingo with closed loop, which is actually producing something with the intent of a piece of it, if not all of it, which being the goal, being returned back into that process. So I'm happy that a lot of brands are starting to pick up on what that means. I mean, you see brands like On who have, their actual shoe that you don't own.
Yeah.
Obviously Tom's is one of the originators of that idea of, the sustainability aspect as it relates to like, just global initiatives. But even that was more gimmicky. Like, yes, you're producing shoes and you're giving shoes to those that need them, but like, what happens to your shoes on both levels, right? Because there's places that have massive landfill or landfills. I'm saying there's places that have massive landfills, and there's those that don't understand what they are yet. But if you give them all the materials, eventually they're going to have that. So you're not even actually solving the problem. You're just saying, hey, we're giving shoes to people, which again, it's a great initiative, but like you said, a Band-Aid. So I'm happy that it's coming to that. I think there's so many solutions that haven't even been like scratched yet, that we're literally still nicking the surface. And, like I said, brands like On are doing great things. Allbirds are doing great things, but they're doing their quarter or their piece, right? Like Allbirds, they have they create their own index where this shoe has 9.2 kilograms of greenhouse emissions. So great, that's a great index to show what the actual impact is, but that just takes it a step further from that Nike Air Max, which is, hey, we replaced the materials on this, but this is the actual impact. So it's reducing the impact, right? Yeah. But like, how do we actually get that shoe to be continuously solving a problem? That one shoe, not just one brand, one anything, that one shoe, how does that actually get back to the brand? So those are challenges that I'm excited to tackle because, as you mentioned, like they are my passions. Footwear being sort of the muse, but sustainability really being the passion in like wanting to just provide long-term solutions to a lot of these problems and a lot of these industries that I just enjoy like on a personal level. So I'm excited for all the change, but it's still so very early, like in this process of like sustainability as it relates to footwear, of course, but greater industries as well.
Yeah, definitely. So that actually makes me think of it's probably been a couple years or more maybe now that Adidas came out and said we're going to have no virgin plastics in anything that our company does, right? How like is that I know that like it's tough to say whether that's effective or not because people that understand all of these things we're talking about realize that like look, it's good, it's a step in the right direction, but it's a step when you've got to run a marathon, right? And
right.
So do you think things like that could be beneficial if other companies applied, or if they using your concept of like closed loop, is there a way that a company could do that like across the board with closed loop materials as opposed to just the recyclable or non-virgin materials? Is that a
Absolutely.
feasible thing? And like, maybe could you talk about what you see as like the challenges of like the product side, and then maybe even thinking of like the the industry side, right? The like
Yeah.
buildings and the materials within.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, my personal opinion is it's a two-part problem. So the first part is there's the big brands, right? And they're so massive that it's just it's going to be decades and probably centuries before they really start moving. I don't say centuries, but probably a century before they really start moving the needle on a global scale. Like these companies are that large. So while I do applaud the like an Adidas Parley initiative or an Adidas Carbon initiative or a Nike Move to Zero initiative. All those are great individually. The problem exists, and this is where Calling All Creators wants to step in. Is to me, it's two issues that need to be tackled. Is there's the closed loop, and then there's the open source. The problem, and as it relates specifically to these large entities, is they silo their innovation within their organization, and then I mean outside of the organization, like you can forget it, especially when it comes to like a Nike or something. Like it's just no one can touch it, right? So Carbon is a perfect example, um, and Adidas was quick on that, and it was really behind their open source methodology to actually partner with a lot of these material manufacturers and process manufacturers. They found Carbon. They weren't actually ever producing shoes. They were just making other 3D or 4D printed products. Just so happened that it works with this particular material for midsole. But and I get it. Adidas wants to be exclusive. They want to have that product. They want to have that brand. All of that, but being able to open that up, even if it's not for the big players, right? If you involve the little players, you say, hey, I know we talked about like outdoor and like, Keen, right? You're small
Yeah.
enough to where you're not going to challenge Adidas as a brand. Or if you do, it's going to be decades. Why don't we open up some of our innovation, our products, our materials to you, see what you do with it? That is one of those sort of like off-brand collaborations that you see now where it doesn't make sense, but when you see it, it's like, oh, yeah, perfect, right? Keen is now using Carbon 4D printed midsoles to evolve their product line. But that
Mm-hmm.
just shifts the industry. But unfortunately, like we don't see that. So as I mentioned, like the first problem is just the big organizations. Like they're too big and too slow, just to put it plainly. That they can create initiatives, but it's one team on a materials or one team on a product direction or one team in basketball category or running category. So it's very siloed. And as I mentioned, that doesn't usually get to spread amongst the organization. And then when you include the external, then like you can just forget it. Like very very few brands are going to open up that. So I'm hoping that in the case of like On and that service, that it doesn't have exclusive IP tied directly to it, because I think that as a service, as a business model, really should be what almost every new footwear brand should adopt. You know what I mean? Like that should just be embedded in your ethos. Like, hey, you never owned this shoe,
Yeah.
right? Or if that's really your lane, if you want to be in sustainability or closed loop, like that's just a new business model that you're just always adopting. Almost like Tom's did, back when they started. Like they opened the floodgates of like, hey, you don't have to take all the profit, right? You can give a little bit of profit to this for good thing, and this became, I mean, I would argue even the birth of like what we see of certified B corporations now. Like they just ingrained
Yep.
it in their culture, their ethos, that it just became normalcy.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna kind of go back to that idea of like, this kind of siloed way of thinking, and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of give to you what I see it as from someone who's not really behind the curtain, I guess, and see if that's where, if I'm right on the way I assume how this stuff works. But it seems like, obviously with brands will have a bunch of different categories, whether that's running or basketball or whatever. But all these people work individually. So not only are they siloed within the company, but they also tend to silo themselves in terms of like technology, right? Or material
Mm-hmm.
use, because they don't go outside of the company. But if they do, they tend to go towards like, I think of like Boost and like, I think it's BASF or somebody that was creating that, right? Where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
that is like, oh, we've already had this partner. So they just go back to that partner and are like, hey, can we work on a new cushioning system?
Yeah.
But also like on the, or I guess thinking in that way, it also forces the rest of the industry to kind of follow suit, right? Because they have to be competitive in the price point, at least in some regards. But then they also are constantly using almost the same players to provide that type of stuff, right? I think, I can't remember precisely, but I think like, Puma's cushioning is the same as Adidas Boost,
Mm-hmm.
roughly same company. And then even Joyride with Nike and Puma's fuel cell, whatever that newer one, the
Yep.
beaded
Yep.
version is, right? So they're basically buying this, you know, technology, cushioning, whatever you want to call it, and being able to label it as their own rather than kind of finding the people that are actually pushing, not to discredit the people at those companies that are creating those technologies, because those are
Right.
phenomenal, but like how can we kind of change that? So I guess like, how do you see like opportunities to, I think you used it on the last conversation we had, but like democratizing those types of that type of change that's needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great question. So my thing is, well, it's the reason why calling all creators exists, right? To democratize the industry, and and I've shared this with you, and I share it with really anyone that I talk to, like in my personal life. But like, it's bigger than sneakers, right? Like, there's sneakers is the muse, and I think that's something that I won't say it's popular now, but it's something that any and everyone can relate to, like man, woman, child. It's just a global thing. Um, the idea, though, is it's similar to politics in that democratizing, the industry, and specifically the design and marketing realms of it is you solve a couple of problems, mainly in authenticity and transparency, but also you're you're even in the playing field. And that's not to discredit anyone that is, a seasoned, tenured, 20, 30, 40-year industrial designer. Um, the skill set is the skill set. The experience is a different thing. And obviously, like, your skill sets will develop with your experience. But there are great ideas today that are, trapped within minds that don't necessarily have the skill set or don't necessarily have the experience. Doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have good ideas, right? I mean, you think about, even someone like a Stacey Abrams, right? Draw like that parallel of this this is a woman that politicians didn't really take seriously, didn't really consider as a threat, right? Didn't really consider a true politician in that sense. Changed the game, literally changed the whole fucking game. And that is my hope for a lot of the independent footwear designers is, while they don't have, the mirrored skill set or the mirrored experiences of, these design executives at these big brands, they still have great ideas, and they should be given a platform to share those ideas. So my hope for the future is, and this is again beyond just footwear, is that external people, meaning people that don't necessarily work for brands or that choose to work independently and more freelance basis, can actually own a bit of their IP as it relates to these products that they're partnering with. So, you see it in glimpses, but let's say, just on the topic that we're talking about, a material, right? Independent designer, as their thesis, is working on this new material exploration. They now own that IP, and then they can turn around and sell that to Nike, to Adidas, to Puma, and really sort of own what that is, versus the opposite of they're trying to prove the material so that one of those brands can actually hire them. So I think that's a part of the education that, and again, the parallel with the politics is there was the people that were just saying, go out and vote, right? Just go out and vote. And they're telling you what to vote or who to vote for and why. And they're sort of imposing that idea, which is the education system. And then you have someone like a Stacey Abrams that is really beyond like a greater mission. It's not just, oh, we're trying to win, the battle. We're trying to win the war here. So like do this and then do this. Like there's an actual strategy behind it. So that is the pulse and the understanding and the cultural nuance that a lot of these independent creators have that sometimes the design execs don't. And not to say that they don't have the experience or the skill set or any of that. They're just too far removed from, the ground, if you will, that they need those perspectives. And that doesn't really come from a spreadsheet. Like it comes from that individual actually contributing to the brand, to the product, to the story, to the narrative, to whatever that thing is. But that's really what democratizing is to me, is giving those people, first of all, a platform, which is what Calling All Creators can do, but then more so an opportunity, which is what, the greater network that Calling All Creators has afforded, and being directly tied to a global pool of aficionados on footwear to literally design executives, or I would say design legends, like as it relates to footwear. We haven't got Tinker yet, but I know he's not officially on IG, but we want to move to like having that caliber of designers. But I mean, there's a healthy amount in there, but it's just throwing them all in that gumbo, if you will, and saying, hey,
yeah,
everyone has a contributing factor to this, this pot.
Yeah, it makes me think too, like kind of going back to the idea of the silos, right? Like the other challenge with, potentially like someone that steps into, let's just use Nike as an example, because you brought up Tinker, right? Like Tinker's incredibly successful. But I also would argue that he's kind of a crutch for some of the marketing people at Nike, right? Like he's the default, there's always a Tinker story that will, sell out a shoe, right? And I'm one of those people that loves those stories. So like, I'm not picking on anybody, right? Like, specifically like the, seeing the sketch version of the Jordan 3s, like that was like a wow factor for me that I thought, damn, I didn't think this day would come, but I love these, But I also think that, the industry kind of has a lot of these crutches. I'll just call them crutches, but like, I think too, like on the marketing side, it's easy for me to kind of, see them because that's usually where I'm at, some form of that. We kind of look at like, like we just talked about this on the Sneaker History podcast a few weeks back, but like signature basketball shoes, right? Like the idea of a signature basketball shoe is that, it's only really going to sell if that player is in LA or New York, maybe Houston, Miami, but like basically New York and LA. And like, it's so funny to me because we've proven that theory is wrong 30 years ago, right? Like Penny sold shoes out of Orlando for years.
The way it started was completely opposite of that. It was just like, hey, we're going to give you a shoe. And it was more experiential or experimental. Just like, yeah, fuck it. We'll try it. Like give them a shoe.
Exactly.
Like,
yep. Yeah. And I think we can, I think like this is a much bigger part of the shift that we need to see. Right. And I'm, as I said before we started recording, I'm optimistic from where we go from all of this political stuff, the COVID stuff, all of that. But like I know that like I've spent 90% of my time in the house for the last year, and I just want to walk around the neighborhood hugging people, right? Like I just want to like I want to go to the local, taco spot and like appreciate those people so much more, right? And I hope that translates to a much bigger group of people than myself, but like also like, in industry, right? Like I think we're at this point where we've pushed everything to those like status quo level of like, how do we actually make this successful, especially in footwear? And like, I actually was talking about it on another podcast, but the idea of like, the more than a game LeBron 7, right? The shoe is the same shoe, but it's labeled for different cities around the globe to kind of be this marketing thing for, the film and all the things that went with that, time frame, right? But to
Mm-hmm.
me, I look at that and think, wow, like somebody that probably at that point had never really had, unless they were a crazy basketball fan, had no reason to like go buy a LeBron shoe in France, now lives, an hour or two outside of Paris, and is like, I got to get this LeBron shoe because it's Paris, and I love going to Paris because it's only a couple hours away from me, and like I hop on the train to do that. And now it's like they have a shoe that really is not like a Paris specific shoe, right? It's just a LeBron with a little Paris label on the heel.
Mm-hmm.
But like the story brings people in from such smaller communities because you get out of those major hubs, right? And I know Paris is a major hub and you could, argue that, but like it's just interesting because I think we're all craving a much more local experience, right? And a much more personal experience, right? Both in like the physical sense, but also like the conversations that we're having, I think that all of this kind of we're in a beautiful place for it, as bad as it
100%.
has been. We're all looking at things a little bit differently. And I think too, like, if there's anything that has come from the last couple of years of the chaos, there's like that baby step of brands committing to do better, right?
Right.
Just generally speaking. And I think that's one thing that I assume probably is the case. But, if you choose to become a designer and work under someone like Tinker at Nike, boom, you have like unlimited, not unlimited, but unlimited resources compared to being a freelance designer fresh out of school or trying to, get your way into one of these big companies. And I'm assuming that that's probably a huge, opportunity for people to like literally get outside of that status quo and outside the box, so to speak, within the companies. But then you're already in this silo, so you probably can't go too far, right? Unless you're, I assume, doing it after hours and stuff like that. I don't know. That's kind of my
Yeah,
assumption.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's. I think you're right in the sense that, like, there's still a form of a silo for sure. Like whether you're internal or external. Obviously, internal has a much larger advantage as far as like the resources available to them. But like, I think in addition to the gig economy and like just the emergence of that and more so, the creator economy that's sort of emerging on social media, TikTok, Instagram, they're, as bad as COVID was, like it leveled the playing field for everyone, right? It was, everyone can create, right? I mean, depending on what you do, but everyone can create. Like, I mean, just think about the amount of podcasts that launched in 2020, like, and I would even say the second half of 2020,
Yeah.
Because so many people are like, all right, like this is COVID's here to stay, right? I'm stuck in the house. I still want to have these conversations. I still want to connect with people. I still want to have community and foster that. I could, and at the time, I think even Clubhouse was still beta. If you think about like August, September at that time. But just Instagram lives and just these ways of communicating on a digital scale became the norm. I mean, Zoom, it's just tenfold
Yeah.
like their stock. You know what I mean? But like things like that help level the playing field for everyone. But we're still, we talked about this before the recording. We're still in that sort of planning phase of, as it relates to brands and what they're doing for the culture and for society and for communities, underserved communities specifically. We just haven't seen those conversations. And even with all the statements like last June, we're all great.
Yep.
Everyone in the community is still like, okay, cool. Like, where did all that money go? What's it being used for? How is it being used? Like, they have questions, right? And like, that level of accountability is what excites me the most. Is, whether it's in footwear, whether it's in the government, whether it's in whatever American corporation or industry, that level of accountability is it's scaling. You know what I mean? And people, like the democracy, if you will, are saying, hey, if I'm going to support my, this brand with my money or vote, what are you doing for me? And it actually starts to become this reciprocal relationship rather than purely transactional. Where, I mean, obviously there's still going to be people that just buy sneakers to buy sneakers, but like, because there's no one that beats Nike, right? But like, if there's now a bunch of different smaller players that are giving you similar product, sometimes better in some cases, but they fully stand behind what you stand behind. Like, you know, which side are you going with? You know what I mean? And like I said, it's hard to compete with a Nike on that scale brand wise. But like, if I find, a LeBron, right, or I find a company that makes a LeBron, but outside of the Nike brand, they make the exact same shoe performance wise, but that same shoe is part of a closed loop system or part of a greater system. Yeah, I'm going with option B. You know what I mean? I think that's just where the democracy side comes into that. There's just so many options now that the playing fields are level, but also it's a threat for big brands. Like they have to be for, the causes or for the underserved communities or for, insert thing here. Otherwise they know, the risk that comes with that.
Yeah, definitely. There's two things that I kind of want to go back on in that. So one is like for the first time in probably since I was a teenager or something and just found it at a Goodwill, like I bought Columbia sportswear, right? Because it was like, oh, this guy's speaking up for, all the injustices that are happening and is representative of the way I feel about something. It's like things like that really, like I'm very drawn to that as like stand for something, right? Like it's something that I think I totally understand the business challenges of that on all aspects, right? There are always people that you're going to upset, you're going to make or lose money. You can argue that left or right, either way, however you want to go. But at the end of the day, like I'd rather have somebody that believes for something in a respectable way than, the kind of chaos approach to it that I would say, like Kevin Plank from Under Armour is very much that, right? Like he dances around a lot of the stuff. He's spoken up about certain things, but then of course he's obviously, putting money in different areas. And not to pick on, him or that brand or anything, but like there's tons of people that do this, right? It's part of the game that a lot of business leaders play in the US. And I think it just needs to be eliminated altogether and like get rid of all that crap. But one of the things that I was thinking of as you were talking about how we kind of normalize Zoom calls and podcasts, like I hadn't done, I've been doing, this podcast started about 5 years ago and then, took a couple of different breaks. And then I'd been doing the Sneaker History podcast a couple times a week, which is more of a, it's more like if we were just like, grabbing food, every week talking about sneakers, right? Very community talk. And I think that is more of it's just a different lane. And I like both of those worlds. So like I'm trying to keep my, finger on the pulse of how things go in those conversations from the sneaker kind of community and like the people. But then this one is like, how do I talk about those more important things, which is why I ended up bringing it back. But one of the things that I didn't do prior was the video side. Right. And, I've always wanted to, but I was always particular about like doing it. We did it, a few years back, but it was like such a tedious thing for me to take on by myself. And, using different platforms, I've tried a few and it was like, okay, it's time to do it. Let's just go for it. But I will say that I think one of the things that normalized Zoom or any of this like kind of conversation outside of the work element, right? Like I think if you've worked in any corporation, you've had some version of a Zoom call, even in the office, right? But the Verzuz, right? Verzuz battles like was like the first time it was like, wait, it's okay to do this remotely and record it on Instagram Live or wherever you watch it now. Like that was such a stamp of approval for us all to like, not only stamp of approval, but it was stamp of approval for us all to be like, okay, this is like really a thing that we're going to do because we got to get through this. But it was also like this beautiful way of like, look, this brings all of us together in a way that like, I can't even remember the last time, I can't remember the last time hip hop did that for an event. There's certain events that come through, right? Like, the big show in New York that happens. Like occasionally, like K Day out in LA will do like a really like big show, and you bring a lot of the West Coast artists together,
Mm-hmm.
and like people will be buzzing about it on Twitter and on social a little bit. But like Verzuz was like, look, like we all got something to do on Saturday. Like
Yeah.
that was the first time of the pandemic that was like, wow. So thinking of that, I'm going to throw the question to you, like,
Mm-hmm.
what could a brand do? What could, a Nike or Adidas do as a statement like that to kind of be like, hey, this is something that we got to do that's going to change the industry, right? Because Versus changed the whole thing to me.
Yeah. Without sharing too much, like that's what Calling All Creators 2021 and beyond will look like is really sort of engineering those moments, right? And I love the parallel of Versus and really just what that meant for, culture, not even just like hip hop, but just like people, right? In that moment of like that was a cultural moment, and like you said, it was the digital club. It's like cool, like we can't go anywhere, so bet like I'm about to see Patty versus like on Saturday. So like that's really our goal, is to sort of engineer those moments. One of the biggest challenges in what we do is gaining the internal support of the design team. When it comes to big brands, smaller brands are a bit more open to those things. But what I do feel and believe is that COVID showed even the best brands that their digital strategy was not that great, right? Even when you think about Nike and even when you think about their best product, which is sneakers, and while they didn't really skip a beat as far as like dropping things, they really, really beefed up their content side of things, because it's like, hey, people can't go anywhere. They can't go to the shop and see the little plexiglass display case with the shoe, right? So we need to be that same thing on the digital scale. And, they built more of an experience or an engagement around it. So you see things with like LeBron right now with like voting and being able to actually have a voice and have a say and have engagement around product. And, obviously for Nikes, and it's just keeping you in the app. The more you're in the app, the more you click around, the more you see a shoe you want to buy on discount, or one that you've been having your eye on for a while. And that's really their goal, is just play the game, right? Literally play the game. So in all of that, and not to just pick on them, just brands have figured out that their digital strategy is not what they thought it was. And we've seen the relaunch of even Adidas Confirm, and them trying to mirror what sneakers is, or really what sneakers was. But it's comforting, like being in the seat of having Calling All Creators and operating it, that they're starting to catch on that, hey, you have the community that we want to talk to, right? And it's not just the hype beast, the high snob, the complex community, which is all great. Like those are the greater fashion, the greater footwear, the greater culture. But those I liken to a CNN, a Fox, a CBS, like the big media channels that sort of control the narratives and manipulate it in some cases. Whereas Calling All Creators is, that small little arm of, the Wall Street Journal, or that small little arm of, Refinery 29 or something. They're more like a Vice, where it's like, hey, we're holding those narratives, right? The ones that we really want to like cling on to, but we're also creating our own, and it's a counterculture, if you will. So, that's really what I'm most optimistic about. But like, with these brands, it's a realization for them that they need to really beef up their digital strategy. They need to really examine internally their teams, and like, on all scales, like, who the individual players are. Like, do they hold biases? Have they been in their seat long enough? And I've seen this in Note to be true with Nike, where they're just giving people flex assignments just to really like test them. So those are the things that I'm most excited about. But, when it's a big organization, again, they can only move at a certain pace. So, with that, they they need to have these moments where they're connecting with the culture on an authentic level, and it needs to be beyond a complex or I guess a complex land now, where they're figuring out these innovative ways to really connect with people. And in addition to, the complex land and the high stability in these places, those are the general public, in my opinion. Now it's like, you want to talk to that niche creator in Singapore that is doing their part on like Black Lives Matter, right? From their seat in, Korea. And they're doing it through the lens of footwear and fashion. Like, how do you tap that person and activate both Singapore and then maybe some other remote community that connects with that product, let's say in Memphis, right? And like that be your strategy of, all right, like let's figure out if we've got something there. So yeah, that's, a bit long winded in that sense, but like, that's where, brands are starting to catch on, but we're going to see it a lot more on like a larger scale, where it's less, Virgil, Yoon, Daniel Arsham, Jun Takayashi, and then maybe you got like a Liz Beecroft, under that. Like, you're going to see a lot more of the Liz Beecrofts elevate to that level of a Virgil or a June. Maybe not like in like notoriety and like, following, but just in how the brands themselves start to, even the product scope, I think.
Yeah. I'm excited for that, because I think it's really interesting. As you were saying that, I was thinking about like, being somebody that's, up until the last couple of years done the trade show thing, repeatedly for a decade plus. And it's almost like we miss those connections, right? Like we didn't have like a design element to, like an agenda or a magic or something, right? There's like a sourcing and those kind of things for product. But like, we still connect with those people that are challenging the norms within that, trade show bubble, right? And it's interesting because we've seen those kind of be eliminated, or they've definitely fallen off in recent years, and we've seen the big brands pull out completely, right? So you don't see Nike or Adidas or Reebok, or it's like none of those major players even want to be a part of that, because they, whatever whatever they choose as they're going to be not a part of that, right? But yeah,
especially
exactly.
Nike, it's like, we're going to complex land for what? Like, our shoes are going to sell regardless.
Yep. So I want to ask, like, obviously, like in the 5 years you've been doing Calling All Creators, you've probably had some speed bumps along the way. What's something that you look back at now that was, maybe a headache at the time, but you look back and think like, damn, this is a turning point, or this is something I could take away, so next time I don't have to, go down this path again?
Yeah. That's a great question. And this is me just being frank, we've had far more losses than we've had wins. And I think that's the case of any sort of startup or any like incubator, or, someone that's being more experimental in that sense. But that's really the goal, right? Is to test and iterate and just continue that process. So, I guess in that sense, my biggest regret, without a doubt, is Project One, and not the actual project, but the manner in which I went about it. So, as I mentioned, like I'm not of like footwear background, or I used to work for Nike retail when I was working at Tesla as well. So I only had a very, very narrow understanding of like the larger entity that are these big brands. Obviously started to learn more like just working with Adidas, but even then, I would have approached Project One differently. And what I mean by that is, so let me back up and just explain what it is actually. So Project One was sort of our final case study and then pitch to the Adidas Advanced Concepts team. So both Mark Dolce and those who don't know, Jose Cabaco, who's the VP of storytelling and like marketing, like that's his avenue. And then Dolce is just VP of like creative direction, but all under Advanced Concepts. Anyways, so I did put together a global team of 12 designers and under a brief of, and at the time, Donovan Mitchell was just an endorsed athlete. It wasn't signature. There was no inklings of signature. Um, we just decided to go at it. I didn't tell the Adidas brand, that was probably the only mistake in not saying, hey, I want to take a stab at this, because I feel like had I told them at the time when we accepted the project, it probably would have actually made it to market. Unfortunately, I wanted to come to them with a finished product, or at least a prototype. So put that together. A few months passed, pitched it to them. They loved it, but during our development process, they also announced that there was the Don issue 1 was coming. No anything outside of that. I think it literally at that point it was like a tweet, and it wasn't even like Don issue 1. It was just like kind of like what they're doing with Trae Young right now, just like, oh, he's getting a signature shoe, and like just kind of create the buzz there. Anyway, so pitched them. Unfortunately, it didn't fit into the product runway, but for a few reasons. One, just not understanding like what their design runway looked like for the next few years. So there was pieces of either existing or yet to come products that we were sort of referencing, and that was sort of showing up. So just to avoid redundancy in that sense. So, anyways, basically that was the regret. Like that was where I learned, like, okay, like I can't try to tackle open source and still follow the same clutch to your chest, like IP, ideal that the brands go with. Like it's, it's not that I had crazy trademarks or crazy IP or any of that. It was design that we made, and that unfortunately aspects of it would actually land in the market without us. But like that's also part of the risk that you take as a young designer, or really just a designer in general. You have to put your work out there in order to really validate. And that was the tough lesson for me, is that in order to validate it, the people need to see it. And in that case, the people that were in charge of making the decision needed to see it so that it could have, landed in the market. But for us, while the relationship with Adidas ended at that time, for me, it was just a broadening of the world of, hey, we did this for the Adidas brand. We got the attention of like literally the highest level that you can get. We can do this for anyone. So, it sort of pivoted there. So, while it was a loss and a lesson that particular product didn't land in market, it's a great experience for the designers involved. Great feedback from the Adidas team. And, the only miss that I wanted was actually having Donovan's feedback and having, just more of an input from them and from the athletes. So that's really the only miss, which would have happened likely had I pitched it to Adidas earlier. So definitely a loss, but, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, take it on the chin, keep it moving, and, just continue to prove that case study and that theory, because it did just that for calling all creators as an entity.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it's one of those things where like, this is like, for the younger audience that's listening, this is something that's repeated, right? Like I, as a, kind of like a agency type that would go pitch people, you've seen probably, whatever amount of things you've seen. For every one thing you've seen, I've pitched 20, and I've probably had 50 conversations for every one before I even got to a pitch. So I think that it's a part of the process, and it's cool to hear that though, because it really does like take one of those situations to, that learning process to refine the approach. Right. And I think that's something that's probably, especially on the design side, right? There's probably a lot of people, and I'm totally assuming here, but like I'm relating this to my relationship with my brother. My brother's very much an introvert in a lot of ways, but especially with his work, like he's incredibly talented. And if anybody's seen his stuff, they like are blown away by what he does, but he doesn't like to put himself out there on the internet the way that a lot of people do, because he's like, no, this is some of this is for me, but also like, I want to make sure that I'm having the conversations about these. I don't want somebody to take this idea. And that's also part of navigating that, right? Like, I think there's always there's always arguments for both sides. And like
Exactly.
sometimes you're going to choose one way and it's going to be the other. But the beautiful thing is it's going to either open a door for another opportunity, or most creative people, that's just one in a million ideas that you're running with, right? Like, so
Exactly.
I think that's the thing of like not comparing yourself, not getting down on yourself for when it does miss, because it's going to, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, and I just to roll that back to sneakers, right? Like that Jordan commercial is so powerful, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember any game winning shots that MJ missed. I remember most of them that he hit, but I
Yeah.
don't remember any that he missed.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
that commercial back in the day was one of those things where it was like, man, you got to just keep that in mind. And that's a really beautiful takeaway, because, and I appreciate you sharing that story too, because,
Of
you
course.
know, it takes a lot to share those stories. I think that that's something that I'm trying to create with this podcast, just a space that we can have these conversations, that we get to be a little bit more open about the things that didn't go our way, because ultimately it helps us all kind of find our way to the next project. Right. But
Exactly.
I guess, like, you know, kind of the other thing that I'm thinking about in, like, you know, the project one kind of leads into this, like the, on the design side,
Mm-hmm.
of, you know, the concept of kind of democratizing design, are there any challenges like that, or I guess not like that, are there any challenges with the kind of concept of, you know, democratizing the design side of product, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be in footwear, right? Because I know, like, you know, you're going to expand well outside of footwear as you grow. But are there any things that like you're cautious about, you know, moving forward in that? I mean, that's obviously one of them, but are there any others that you can think of?
Yeah. I mean, so as it relates to design, I mean, footwear specifically, like I touched on it, is it's usually centered around the IP, right? And brands just wanting to protect that at all costs, and really anything, right? I mean, not even just like IP as it relates to product, but just anything like brands are trying to protect. So they usually keep those conversations very, very static in the sense of like, you know, even as you're pitching, right? And, you know, there's not usually a very open dialogue because they're trying to take in information and relate it to what they can't share. Um, so in footwear, that's I expect that to be the norm. I expect it to loosen up as we really start to really hone in on what you touched on, which is like this sort of like global, you know, perspective of, you know, these niche pocketed stories in different communities, remote communities, I would say. So I do expect that to sort of open up as that becomes more normal. The other side of it is the expansion, and for me, the blue ocean, which is right. There's footwear, right, and when you consider an industrial designer or a product designer, like footwear is one of a thousand things that we can design or that individual can design. So for me, it's beginning to evolve the closed loop and the open source. And again, while footwear is the muse, like it's going to expand to product in general. But those are the ethos that I want to rely on. So in that sense, I'm excited because that's where the timing is perfect. Like brands are recognizing, hey, we need to open up whatever the process is, right? Whether it's just giving content creators more flexibility with what they're creating, how they're creating. And that's one end of the spectrum. And then there's the whole other end of the spectrum. And we've seen this in some cases. But there's legit agencies that do what Calling All Creators aims to do, which is to get the brief from the brand, create the product, and create the marketing story and the whole go-to-market strategy around that. And the name of the agency is slipping my mind right now, but they have offices in like New York and I believe Amsterdam, but they basically did that for Google. And while Google, everyone expects Google powerhouse and they're up there as far as like recognition with a Nike, very few people would have expected Google to outsource product design. But when you think about it, like Google's not a product design company in that sense, or at least like hardware. Obviously the software thing they've got down to a science. But they outsource this agency to, hey, using, you know, this list of data, this targeted demographic, this targeted areas, design a product for this, you know, these people. And that's really the idea that we want to go for Calling All Creators is receiving those briefs, and whether it is just marketing and it's a strategy or content around that, or it's an actual product, both hard, soft, or digital in that case. That's really the idea, and the all-encompassing nature of calling out creators, just centered around open source as, the ethos of, hey, every project that we do, you can expect there's going to be a very lean core team. And then based on the product, based on the project, we're going to build a team around that. And then, that's how we're going to go about it. So it's always lean, but then when the opportunity presents itself, there's a closed loop aspect to it as well, where we're bringing in elements of sustainability. We're bringing in elements of transparency. We're bringing in elements of like for good or social justice. Just things that are, positive in the sense of like, it's not just a profitable or I guess monetary KPI. Like there's different KPIs. Whether what was your impact? What was, and agencies do this already, but what was your conversions and conversations and engagement and things like this? But like, how does that relate to impact? And I think that's really the largest question that we want to aim to answer is, how are we solving these problems impactfully? And whether it's designing a product or designing a narrative, like that's the goal.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I didn't really think about this until you started talking about that, but it's kind of interesting because in a sense, like we've democratized a lot of elements of business along the way through, Fiverr and Elance and all these places where like you can find a little bit of help for a little bit of something here and there. Right.
Yeah.
But footwear is kind of interesting, or product design is kind of interesting because it takes so much more. It's so much more in depth, and I would argue that, most products should probably look at footwear as an example of how to create great product, because the stories are so deep and so intertwined within the actual product that, a lot of things outside of footwear don't have that much thought process gone into them from like the get-go, right? It's like, exactly. We just need this product to hit the market, to hit these numbers, and it becomes a part of the spreadsheet. But it's interesting because we don't have ways, that really kind of open up the opportunities for, like, let's say an aspiring footwear designer to just, get their foot in the door on a project level basis, the way we do on like, okay, I can provide this service, as me as an individual, or through, whatever platform that you choose to work through as a content creator. Right. So I guess in that, kind of vein of thought, like what are the best ways for designers to get involved with you specifically moving forward? And, how do you see the collective of what you're building with those designers, supporting each other too, like, both internally and then, maybe on a project or, whatever basis with brands that you might work with?
Yeah. Yeah. So my thought is this, and to me, there's sort of an evolution to it in I guess the discovery of it. So and for those that aren't familiar, literally the best resource you can go to learn footwear design in this day and age, as a young person, is probably pencil. And that's without a doubt what Dwayne is doing is incredible for the community. It's just amazing to see, and very, very grateful to be connected to individuals like that. But for me, like that's the introduction, right? And that's the 16-year-old kid, 17-year-old kid that is kind of interested in sneakers, is interested in sports, maybe he's designed a couple things or photoshopped a couple like mashups, and it's like, hey, I like this, right? I want to explore it. I want to continue it more. Calling out creators fits in post pencil to me, because pencil, and again, amazing program, but it's still only solving a small amount of the need in the industry. And that's just the awareness. The awareness is that's what opens the door. And that's what, I'm, most grateful about what Dwayne is doing is he's just making people aware that, hey, you can actually be a footwear designer, right? Even if you were considering it, you're going to school for it, like you can even take this program and get this accelerated, course through design with this very tenured legend in footwear, but also you're working on actual projects, not conceptual, not thesis. Like you're working on actual projects for brands. I think that's where the biggest value is. I won't say the problem, but the challenge comes from that is what happens to an individual or user post pencil, right? Is where do they go? I mean, pencil is great, but they are beginning to serve more people. Like they're starting to move more into the college realm and, people that aren't actually in college and things like the HBCU programs. But then the idea, I feel, with pencil is to make them aware, get them a loose skill set, get them some sort of, experience with the brand. And then it's either shipping them to go work for a brand or shipping them to work, or not shipping them, but bringing them in-house. And they just help to build pencil. And then there's some that, individual just kind of go off and do their own thing, and they get like connected with someone that, turned into a freelance opportunity. But that particular class of folks, that third class, is where Calling Out Creator steps in, which is you've got a bit of the education, you've got a bit of the experience, you've more so have the decision, right? That, hey, this is what I want to be in. So we're going to offer you the community. So we offer the community as in forms of inspiration. A lot of what people will see later this year is more of like a membership opportunity, to where we're really starting to cultivate that community, and with purpose, not just like, hey, we're a community and we just kind of throw ideas at the wall. It's like, let's just rapidly ideate projects internally so that we're rapidly validating and testing things that we can then take to brands and take to market, and et cetera, et cetera. But really just creating that environment for creators to go to with like-minded people. Like, I mean, I know that sounds crazy because that's just social media, right? But like, that doesn't exist within a brand. I mean, unless, some individual within the brand starts it, and then it's, this team of 10 people and just very grassroots. But you don't see it on this larger global digital level. I won't say you don't, but it's rare that you see it there with purpose or with mission. It's usually just like, hey, we're a forum, or we're like a subreddit, right? And we just kind of go here and we shoot the shit. And it's basically Nike Talk, which Nike Talk was great, but Nike Talk set up opportunities for all of us. Like it planted seeds of like, hey, you're into just Adidas, there's a forum for you. You're into only forums in Adidas, right? There's a forum for you. So like it started to segment footwear, under that realm. And that's what we're starting to see now, where, in these like niche pockets of social media, Instagram, TikTok and Clubhouse and all these places, but it's really just providing a platform for creators. And that's really what the need is. And that's both from feeling, but also from creators literally telling me, and just the whole team, hey, like, thanks for sharing, my sketch, right? This person followed me, turned into a conversation. Now I got a freelance gig. Or thanks for reposting this. So-and-so reached out and now I'm working at Under Armour. Or, thanks for sharing this. It helped me change how I approach how I design. Like all of those things are good user stories for us. So it's really, for me, I'll say it starts and ends with the creators, but it's about the creators. And obviously it's the name, right? But like, that's why we do it, which is providing community and platform for them to whatever they want to do, whether it's grow your skill set, whether it's connect with people, actually work on projects, or, just other things that you'll start to see, which is the membership side of things, where it's a very curated experience for the people that have been rocking with us for, years, and like they appreciate the platform.
Yeah, it's beautiful though, because that's, again, going back to that timing thing, this is something that we're all craving, whether we know it or not. We're craving that community. We're craving that support system that we would normally have. And I don't mean like support system in the sense of like, call your friend when you're struggling. I mean like the dude that talks to you when you get a cup of coffee out of the, break room or whatever at your job, right? Mm-hmm. Those are pieces of our life that have been missing so much. And it's cool to hear you say that too, because one of the things that I'm, like I have the Sneaker History Patreon Discord. We have, I don't know, we're probably up to close to 100 people within that little group, but it's never really, none of what I do is really about the sneakers, right? Like, it's all about the people. And that, to me, that community that we've been able to create, it on one hand, it's finally paying like the cost that I have to keep the podcast and recording going and like site up and all those things. But like, it's the supportive nature that I see within there, right? Like the guys that are, looking out to find shoes for other dudes that are looking for something, or like it's awesome because there's so many off topic things going on where it's like this guy's sharing recipes with each other, sharing movie thoughts, and like those types of things translate into what you create so much, that I don't think that people fully understand. Like, like, don't get me wrong. Like when I write, I'm also like closed off from the world.
Yeah.
I'm the most antisocial person ever, right? Just lock me in. Like I need to be plugged into the matrix for a while to do this. But it's all those experiences around that shape my thoughts in navigating, that essay or whatever I'm writing at the time. Yeah. I think that's such a cool opportunity to, and to hear you're kind of just excited for the timing of it, right? Because it really is something that's like, this has been a snowball that like almost just like paused and spun in place and got bigger for the last 12 months, right? Like,
yeah, literally.
Pretty
like
awesome.
Just in this inertia of just like Sonic almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
But no, it's interesting you say that because like I've always considered calling all creators like competitors, right? Like it's, I mean, not that it's like at that stature, but like a Behance. Yeah. But it's Behance with more of a community aspect built into it. Well, I mean, don't get me wrong, Behance is incredible, but like it's literally just a viewing sort of platform. Where, Behance is almost like, I guess, Tumblr in that sense of like, great,
definitely.
Legendary in the sense of like, everyone uses it, but like it's very one dimensional. And like, while you'll find great things there, like there's not really the best opportunity to like interact and like build community there. And that's really the idea with calling out creators is, it's, for me, I consider myself less of a designer and more like a product strategist and like higher level of just like, okay, what is my understanding of the world? Right? What is my understanding of industries? And looking at, the greater network that is calling out creators, start to say, okay, like if I put these three people together, what do we get? And what does that mean for the world? Like, what is that product, right? And just knowing what they do individually, but more specifically, like what they can do collectively and like what that can mean for the world and like what that can mean for the brand. So like, that's, just the opportunity there. And like, and this is getting like super, super like, I guess, in the future, but like just being able to, just to put more things into the world, not more in the sense of like excess, but like, we just have this tagline that we all have the power to create. And that's really the ethos of like, yes, you can be a 3M, you can be a Nike, you can be a IKEA or a Knoll or these places, but like anyone can make this shit in a living. Like if they really wanted to, you know what I mean? Like, all they need are the materials and the tools and like the time. And that's the equation.
Yeah. Most definitely. And it makes me think like at my time of, at like when so I was at Complex when like it actually just popped up on, I don't go on Facebook hardly ever, but it just popped up on my Facebook a couple days ago or yesterday over the weekend, whenever it was. But it was the first time I posted about, so I had signed up for the Complex sneakers handles, right? Like we didn't have that when I started at Complex and we were breaking it out. That was part of what I was working on. And like, I remember signing up for it on my phone, like setting it all up and just that, that like process of doing all those things collaboratively too. The team that I was a part of at Complex, the teams that I was a part of at Finish Line, even at StockX, right? Like I've been able to witness what you're talking about from a business perspective of like I've seen projects that just light people on fire and like and people that light each other on fire to make that project fire, right? Those two people could be coming from completely different places, but then they get in a room, they get on an idea, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, this is like, how do we just get more of this? This is beautiful.
Exactly.
So I totally understand where you're coming from, and excited to see that. I'm going to throw a curveball on this kind of last question, because you kind of already told me, what I mean. Calling all creators seems like, the dream opportunity for you in the footwear space right now. But like, what would be like the highest aspirational dream opportunity for you, thinking outside of the footwear space? You mentioned a lot of cool brands right there in that last sentence or two. So what would that look like for you?
Yeah. Without, I guess, revealing too much of the master plan. I mean, I guess the obvious things are, obviously growing beyond footwear for sure. And that's just, it's by design. It's something that, as I mentioned, like footwear is always the muse, and, it's something that we will always continue to do, like just as a personal like passion, and collective passion, but also just really applying the skill set and the knowledge and experience that is an industrial designer, to the world. So, I mean, I guess the ideal position, I mean, if it's not working like for myself, but like the ideal position in which I'm going after is, I consider myself like a director, as I mentioned before, but like moving more into that executive level position, calling all creators being more of an entity, and me just being sort of the chief like vision officer, something along those lines, where it's rooted in that open source, it's rooted in closed loop, but it's rooted in just creating good product. So I guess that's more like the ideal. Like that's, plan A. Having a plan B is always good, I guess as my mom would say. Cause I'm very much the same. She's just like, wait, so what do you do? And like, update her on conversations and shit. And she's like, oh, cool, praying for you. But it's like, yeah, that's the extent of it, right? So like, it won't be until that first big win comes in where I feel like I'll actually be recognized as like a functioning adult as it relates to like my mom. Yeah. But if it is for a brand, or if it is like, outside of calling all creators, it's in that same realm. I guess the good thing for me, in the present day is, as I mentioned before, a lot of the social media companies are really starting to focus more on creators, and actually using that verbiage. So having, the established brand, and more specifically the established community, there's a lot of leverage there as it relates to opportunities like in the greater market. I don't say the unfortunate side, but because of where the industry is now, a lot of that is just rooted specifically in content. So it's most companies now are like, hey, Target, right? We'll send you the product, you create it however you want, and we'll share it. Like that's sort of like the new influencer model versus like having a brief, is what it used to be. So in that, like it's difficult, but it definitely is in that same realm of working with creators. So if it's not specifically in footwear with calling all creators, it's just being able to continue to leverage the community in some way, or the experience that came from the community, or the insight that came from the community, in that it's bigger than just creating content. That's one of the first things, but also beginning to educate creators specifically, and it's still being about the creator. And, okay, if we're going to pivot this into a greater industry sort of thing, how are we educating creators? And you see like Instagrams, like creators page, like starting to do glimpses of that, of this is how you set up lighting, and these are certain tips of editing your photos, and just all the smaller sort of, I don't say intangible things, but just beginner sort of skill sets, if you will. But we're going to see a lot more of that, to where sort of this, rising tide raises all boats sort of thing, where, the cream of the crop, if you will, is the influencer, the typical influencer. But even that has just been skimmed away, in my opinion. But, everyone's going to be leveled to this idea of creator. But then there's going to be varying levels of creators. There's going to be creators that, hey, like I said, we just ship you a product, You create your content, that's the transaction. And then there's going to be entities, and likely more the influential people, the blue check folks, where they're more in charge of strategy or building the community around that initiative or that product. So I believe we're going to see more of that, but wanting to, for me personally, like, I guess, be a thought leader in that. So, well, it's not like really a position. It's just using that insight. It's using that experience to say, hey, like, let's look at this differently, right? Because I think even now that the conversation around creator, as I mentioned, is still content, and it is still under that guise of influencer. 50,000 followers, 100,000 followers, and like, not to be like overly political, but like you're just Fashion Nova, former athlete chick that wears bikinis. You know what I mean? Like, cool. Like, that's one model, right? As far as like influencer, yep. But then there's people that I classify like the community of calling out creators, which are prosumers. Like, they're aficionados of footwear, but they can also say, hey, that new Kyrie, they should have evolved it, right? It's too redundant from the last couple of models, or they should have done this because performance-wise it wasn't, this. So they have valuable insight to offer versus an influencer, which is data-driven, which is great, right? 100,000 followers, they're in LA, they're in New York, they're in Paris. Cool. Like, so you're a fashion influencer through and through. But just because you're posting this thing, does that mean that you're actually selling a product? Or are you actually providing thought leadership in that space in some way? Or is it just like some catchy comment in, a carousel of posts? So like, yeah, again, a bit like long-winded. So either chief visionary or like, thought leader in the sense of like still working with creators. Obviously a couple preferences as far as like industry, but just wanting to change the industry really is really the mission, through and through.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. I think it made me think of, kind of, as you were talking about that too, like I guess like to want to ask like your opinion on like you're talking about content and design and like how, it's like so forced together because of social media, right?
Mm-hmm.
That kicked into my mind, like, I'm a big like Kickstarter Indiegogo person. Like, when product is being developed on those platforms, I try to support whenever I have the money to do so.
Mm-hmm.
But I love scrolling through and seeing what people are doing and thinking and like pushing, because it's kind of what you're talking about, but just in like a general sense, right?
Yeah.
But what's really fascinating about it is, whether we realize it or not, the best products on those platforms have incredible content to get us emotionally involved in that product before we even see the product in hand. So it's almost it's almost like the real world example of what you're talking about, right? It's like,
mm-hmm.
I've bought in the last couple of years, I've bought a lot of like little like replaceable like silverware, right? That's like credit card size, so it just slides out, stuff like that. That's like, you can probably find it on Amazon, but like, hey, this person thought this through a little bit more. It's going to cost me a little bit more, and I've got to wait 6 months or 9 months to get it. Yeah. But like, I'm supporting an individual here that is really like trying to make a difference, and
so connect with the story for sure. Like,
exactly,
person, the brand, the anti, Bezos, like whatever your thing is. Yeah, like you connect with that through whatever that perspective is.
Yeah, definitely. It's such a it's such an interesting time that we're in, right? Because we have access to all these things, but inevitably we get kind of just sucked away by whatever comes, and catches our attention, and then we're off down that path, right? And to circle back to footwear, like Nike does this all the time. They're doing it with a LeBron watch. Like, they're doing it with the vote back thing. It's like, these are all things that we, as sneaker people and sneakerheads, we generally are interested in, but like it also deters us from potentially seeing a lot of other things that are out there. So exactly. It's really interesting to see where you're at, and like kind of this like where I think we're in a turning point for a lot of stuff, because people are ready for change coming out of COVID. Whenever all this stuff is, I would say, fully or almost fully, safe to move forward. And we're going to see a lot of different things, but like that's a really good position to be in my opinion. So, well, man, it's been so dope to talk to you. I know we went over by quite a bit, but I'm appreciative that you just rock with me for the extra half hour here. I guess like definitely let people know where they can find you. And I guess any last things that you want to share too, if they need to be aware of in the future.
Yeah, yeah, definitely appreciate the time. As far as like socials, calling all creators, it's just calling all creators on Instagram. The website's still under construction, but it's callingallcreators.co. You should expect that relaunch either February or March. And we're going to be doing some cool things this year. I'm excited about a lot of the conversations that we've been having. 2020 was interesting in the sense that we didn't do a lot like, public facing work. There's a couple little things that we did. But a lot of incredible conversations and a lot of like new direction that excites me, and I'm sure would excite a lot of the community, and just being able to, have a place that's their own. So yeah, super excited about that. More personally, I still uncomfortable like being like the front facing man. But you can find me on Instagram. It's Jeremy M.Green. M is my middle initial. And yeah, same thing on Twitter. Not on anything else like Clubhouse or any of these other things. So, try to limit my social media interactions. But yeah, you can find me there. And I mean, yeah, outside of that, it's been super good. Like just chatting with you, I know we've talked about like bigger things and wanting to sort of find a way to work together with like sneaker history and even just having more conversations like this. Cause I think this is our part, right? In sort of changing the industry and wanting to literally be the change that is the industry, and having these conversations that are less around, while it's all great, the hype and, this shoe's coming out, this month and this week and that. And like the drops are cool. But the drops are literally for me, the introduction to sneakers. And like the conversation that we're having now more about the sustainability and the greater industry and, awareness and transparency. And like, these are the conversations that, should be landing on sneakers and confirmed app and things like this. And we'll start to see it more, but, firm believer in the divinity of it and that it literally starts here. So.
Definitely, man. I'm 100% with you. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for spending the time with me. Thank you everyone for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode. Peace.
Peace out.